archaeologists working on this project do generally agree that the way that these bodies were scattered in the mass grave, the condition that they were left in, and also the makeup of the individuals in this group are not consistent with any other sort of outcome other than an intentional and methodical destruction and torture of these individuals, shining a rather dark light on the final moments of these individuals as well as the time frame as a whole. This is in no way, shape, or form the first time a human has ever tortured another human, although this is simply the oldest recorded physical evidence of torture we've found so far. And while the experience these individuals likely suffered is beyond brutal, the fact their bodies are able to tell the story of their death nearly 7,000 years later is rather interesting, albeit in a rather morbid and upsetting way. But moving on from the first physical evidence of torture, let's now discuss the first recorded evidence of torture, which comes much later in history, roughly 3,000 years later, or roughly 4,000 years ago from today, in the mid to late 1770s BC. During this time, the ancient city of Babylon was thriving in ancient Mesopotamia. And while there's plenty of things we could talk about in regards to the ancient Babylonians, one of the most relevant parts of their lore I want to discuss is their exceptional record keeping, most notably a legal text known as the Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi is far from the first ever written record, and it actually came thousands of years after the ancient Sumerians invented the written word and record keeping as an activity. However, the Code of Hammurabi would introduce a first of its own, as it was the first ever piece of recorded text that would mention torture by name, and it did so in a legal context. The Code of Hammurabi mentions countless laws. However, the one most relevant to this video is law number 153, and this law states explicitly, quote, "If a woman bring about the death of her husband for the sake of another man, they shall impale both of them." Now, in case that wasn't already obvious enough, what that's essentially saying is that if a woman is cheating on her husband and decides to conspire with her new boyfriend to kill her husband, both the wife and the boyfriend should be impaled for their crime. Now, while that alone is interesting enough, obviously the most interesting part is that the punishment mentioned by name was being impaled. And while yes, you could argue that being impaled is a method of execution, when you have an execution method that is so painful, so drawn out, and typically done in a public fashion to humiliate the victim as they die, I think it's hard to argue that execution doesn't also serve as a torture method. And therefore, the Code of Hammurabi made history by being the first ever recorded reference of torture. And yet, we're just getting started. Early torture regulations. Although we're about to discuss a small handful of civilizations where torture was relatively common, almost paradoxically, torture had its own code of ethics, or at least rules of conduct. Which to me kind of suggests, even though on a societal level, torture may have been used for one reason or another, on a personal level, it appears